if you're first in that infatuation period, in that dating period that can last anywhere from 6 to 18 months, you don't actually notice some of those annoying things because it's hard to see red flags with rosy colored glasses. I'm going to say that one more time. It's hard to see red flags with rosy colored glasses. When you're in that infatuation period, when you're in that time where you're really in love and it's a lot of romance, you don't really notice those annoying things. You don't notice the small things that your potential spouse or your fiance is doing that will drive you up a wall later on. And if you don't start having those conversations about the little things that are different between you and them, then it's going to cause some friction in the relationship. So what do I mean by that? Welcome back to Young Black Married Christian Podcast. Listen, I know you fall into one of those categories. You may even fall into some of those categories, but even if you fall into none of those categories, I can promise you that over the next 4 to 5 minutes, we will give you 4 to 5 tips to fortify the future of your marriage. Now, listen, I know you are short on time. I know you're short on data, but do us a favor. If you can't make it all the way through the podcast, click the download button attached to the podcast and take us with you throughout your day. So listen, we are talking about the 7 mistakes couples make in their first year of marriage. And it's a lot to get into, but guess what? We're going to do it for you. This is your host, LaShaw James, and my beautiful wife is not with me today, but we're still going to get into it. This is your host, LaShaw James, from all the way down in San Antonio, Texas, working hard to make sure your spouse doesn't become one of your exes. Let's get started. So like I said, we're talking about the 7 mistakes that couples make in their first year of marriage. And this is your homework as you're listening to this podcast. Do not just listen to these 7 things and absorb this information. You need to find which one of these are you currently doing inside the first year of your marriage, or if you're not married yet, which one of these are you most likely to do in your first year of marriage, and make a conscious decision to act against it. So again, don't just listen to this. Here's your action step. Make sure you write down which one of these you're actually doing inside of your relationship right now that you need to go ahead and change so that you can avoid some of these common mistakes. Number 1, not talking about money. Now, I know we beat this drum a lot, but listen, not talking about money is something that a lot of couples do. And listen, talking about money is difficult. Okay, people tend to avoid it, especially in romantic relationships and new marriages, because it tends to lead to arguments. But one of the benefits of marriage is the financial partnership that's formed. Two people have shared expenses, but couples who don't talk about finances establish a really, really bad pattern where one of them is in the dark about money, and then the marriage suffers, and then resentment and distrust start to happen, and the marriage can fail from there. So listen, we're not going to be one of those people who avoid the concept of talking about money. It's something that just has to be done. And here's something interesting for those of you believers out there, for those of you Christians, it's almost alarming how much Jesus talks about money. I mean, he discusses this topic more than he talks about faith, more than he talks about prayer. Jesus typically taught in parables, and 11 of about his 40 parables were about money. They're about money. Or they used money to teach some sort of spiritual truth. So, for example, the parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl compared the kingdom of heaven to riches. The parable of the talents tells the story of a master who entrusts his servants with money to make a point about being productive. And in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, he draws attention to a great eternal reversal where those who are most comfortable on earth find themselves coming up in the rear. And the question is, if Jesus is talking about money and Jesus is talking about finances, why is that important? And then how much more important is it for us to talk about finances within our marriage? So here's a practical action step for us today. We have to make sure that we are in a relationship where talking about money is something that comes easy to us. It's something that doesn't just come easy, but it's something that we practice on a regular basis. If we're not practicing it, maybe this week's the week that we start. Maybe this week is the week that we go to our spouse and say, hey, we need to talk about, where we're at financially. We need to talk about what kind of jobs we have and are we asking for raises? Are we going to stick in this situation for another month, another 2 months, another 2 years? How much debt do we have? What are our financial goals? What are our financial responsibilities? And if you're not married, this is a great time to figure out what kind of mindset does the person that you're dating have about money. I know it's not a sexy topic. It's not really something that, people would really want to talk about while they're dating. But just asking like, hey, what's your mindset towards money? What's your mindset towards debt? How okay is it to use credit cards? How do you plan for financial constraints that happen? And when bad things happen that we have to pay money for, is it okay to take out a loan? Or, what are your plans financially? Where do you see yourself financially in 10 years? And just beginning to get a good idea of where they're at mentally. That way you understand kind of what you're getting into. If you decide you want to marry this person, it would be really nice to know how they think about money before you actually make that commitment. So number one is not talking about money. Number two is not establishing equal household roles. Not establishing equal household roles. What does that mean? Your house has some daily tasks, right? There's chores, there's errands, there's cleaning. All of that happens on a daily basis, and it has to be split between two people. Now, this is something that you might not think about, because when you're by yourself, you do all these things by yourself. You wash the dishes when you feel like it. You wash clothes when it happens, when you need to, or when you feel like it. All of the daily chores, you're just splitting up on your own time. But when two people come together, the laundry is shared, the chores are shared, the cleaning has to be shared. And if we don't divide up the daily chores, if we don't establish equal household roles, then we're going to have a little bit of a problem. Listen, we talked about this before, that frustration is nothing but unmet expectation. Frustration is nothing but unmet expectation. Listen, if you got your phone out right now, that's tweetable. Just throwing that out there. Throw that on the Instagram, tag us in it. Throw that on the Twitter, tag us in it. That frustration is nothing but unmet expectation. So if you can set and manage expectations, then you can limit frustration. You're not going to get rid of all of it, but you can at least limit some of it, because you've set and you've managed these expectations. Now, here's the thing about daily household chores. This is what makes them kind of more impactful than some of the other things we're going to talk about today. If you go just 7 days without doing any sort of housework or cleaning, it piles up. The dishes pile up, the trash piles up, the bills need to be paid. They all pile up, and all the administrative things, they start to pile up. Very quickly, you can see the laundry start to pile up. And if you're in a relationship, this can quickly become annoying. It can become very irritating if one person wants the house to look a certain way or feel a certain way. If the other person just takes 5 days off, then you start to see this little disconnect where expectations are not being met and frustration just floods into the relationship. And then this problem gets even more tragic if kids get involved, right? Once kids get involved, then not only do you have to work and you got to take care of the kids, then the laundry's there, right? And you have multiple people are working hard. And sometimes when you come home, you want to relax, you want recreation. And so while one person's watching the television, the other person's looking at the dishes like, man, I can't believe they didn't do the dishes. I can't believe they didn't take out the trash. Or I can't believe they still haven't done our taxes. Or I can't believe they still haven't done insert whatever daily, weekly chore here. And instead of having that resentment because a person's, relaxing and taking time for recreation while, you're doing some sort of daily chore, daily housework, if you just establish those roles and set those expectations up front, you can avoid some of that frustration and avoid some of that confusion. So 7 mistakes that couples make in the first year of marriage. Number 1, not talking about money. Number 2, not establishing equal household roles. And now number 3, forgetting the small gestures that go a long way. Sometimes people stop trying as hard after marriage. They feel like they don't need to chase after their significant other because, hey, they already have them. You're already married, right? So they stop sending flowers. They stop having date nights. They stop just sending little gifts for no reason. And personally, I believe these things don't have to stop because you're married and you're not dating. In fact, it's actually a good idea to keep these things going after the marriage and after settling in to life together. Listen, I've given this example before, but I think it's worth repeating. When me and my wife got married, somewhere along the line, I just stopped opening up the door for her. And I think we just told each other, hey, it's more efficient if I get the door myself. So, it's really cute that you're trying to, open the door for me, but it's a little faster if I get into the car, blah, blah, blah. And so my wife just started opening the door for herself. And I kind of let it happen because I told myself, you know what, it is a lot of work and it does take more time. And she is capable of opening the door for herself. But then I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was after a church service or what, but I felt like God said, hey, why did you open the door for Doriana when you first started dating? And I was like, well, that's an easy answer. Culturally, it's a sign of honor. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of just saying, thank you for riding with me. Thank you for choosing to go on this date with me. Thank you for choosing to be with me. And then he just asked me, so why did you stop? Is it okay to stop showing honor and respect, now that you're married to her? And again, this isn't something I'm pulling directly out of like some sort of command, but it was just something I felt personally convicted about. And so I told my wife, I said, hey, I know this might take a little bit more time for us to get used to it. And it might take a little bit more time for us to get into a car, get into a building. But when you're with me, just please, allow me to serve you by opening the door for you. I know it's going to be awkward, and I know you're more than capable of opening the door for yourself, but allow me to serve you by opening the door for you as a sign of respect, as a sign of honor, as a sign of me saying, I love you. Thank you for rocking with me. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for being with me. And I'm just as honored that you're with me now as I was when you first decided to go on a date with me, when you first decided to allow me into your life and give me the time of day. And I'm still thankful for that. And I'm not going to treat you as something that's common, because you're not common. You're special to me. And so because you're special to me, even though we're married, we've been together for a long time, I'm going to get that door for you. And so when you're around me, baby, don't touch doors. That's kind of a joke we have. When you're around me, you don't touch doors. Every door will be open for you by me. And again, it's just a sign of respect. It's not even about who's watching or who's around, or if we're around, old fashioned people, or if we're around friends. We could be, coming out of a movie theater at 12:30 in a dark parking lot. I'm still going to get that door, because it's a sign from me to her. And it also serves as a reminder for myself that you better honor this relationship. And no matter what kind of arguments you may be going through, you need to be thankful that you two are still together. And so again, every single door we go through, I'll go ahead and grab it. And it goes back to those small gestures that go a long way. But I'll be honest, I do have a marriage confession. My confession is the gift giving is something I struggle with. And so I think we could all do better, ladies. We can all do better, guys. We can all do better at making sure we're still giving those random gifts. So maybe an action step for you today is on your next visit to the store, if your spouse isn't with you, if the person you're dating isn't with you, just, designate $10 to $20 or $30 to get a small gift. And go far enough to even put it in a bag with some, tissue paper in it, some gift wrapping paper in it, or wrap the gift and say, hey, I'm getting you a gift, not because it's Christmas, not because it's your birthday, not because it's Valentine's Day, but I'm getting you a gift because you deserve it. And I'd like you to have it. And those small gestures can really go a long way. So now we're on to number 4 out of the 7 mistakes that couples make in their first year of marriage. Number 1 was not talking about money. Number 2 was not establishing equal household roles. Number 3 was forgetting that the small gestures, they can go a long way. And number 4 is not moving out on your own as a couple. So here's a quote from a divorce lawyer. He says that he's found that living with parents during the first few years of marriage could lead to the end of the marriage. The first few years of marriage is a time of adjustment for couples who did not live together prior to marriage. In addition to merging their lives together, couples are also adjusting to each other's annoying little habits. Now, having another adult in the home, especially a parent, is generally a recipe for failure. Couples need time to bond with each other as married partners, and they should try their best to avoid living with others during the first few years of marriage. Now listen, in the scripture, it tells us in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And so a lot of preachers will summarize this verse and say, listen, when you get married, it's time to leave and cleave. And that idea of leaving and cleaving, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring your parents or that you're not spending time with them. Leaving your parents means recognizing that your marriage created a new family and that this new family must be a higher priority than your previous family. If spouses neglect to cleave to each other, the result is a lack of intimacy and unity. Cleaving with your spouse doesn't mean that you're with your spouse every second. It means that you understand that you're essentially glued to your spouse, or that you and your spouse are joined together. And so a lot of times changing that hierarchy within the family is very difficult, because for example, to my mom, I'm always going to be her son, right? And for those of you who have, parents where you're closely tied together, they can't see you in any other relationship that's higher than the one that you share with them. But whenever you get married, there is a change in how the relationship of the family is shifted, and how the alliances are kind of formed. And it doesn't mean, again, that you're abandoning your parent. It doesn't mean that you're disrespecting your parent, but it does mean that there is a new family being formed with two people coming together. And that will change the dynamic of the family that was there before, when it was just you and mom or you and dad. And so, again, we do not want to get married and live with someone else, because it's going to create a little bit of problems whenever you're actually trying to leave and cleave. And so number 4 is not moving out on your own as a couple. Number 5 is not being honest about debt before you get married. Now, listen, we already had number 1 is the money talk, but this one's a little bit more specific. This one is a little bit heavier, in the sense that if you have some sort of outstanding debt, whether that be medical bills, whether that be student loans, whether that be credit card bills, whatever outstanding loans that you have, you need to have this conversation early, because it's not sexy to get into a marriage and find out that somebody has a bunch of credit cards taken out in their name, or a bunch of, balances due in different places. That can really pull away from the family, because now you have to, as a unit, as a team, you both have to overcome that stress. And so again, don't hide some of these financial facts from each other. And on a side note, don't hide any of those health related facts from each other. Like, you have to have that conversation very early, so that you're both on the same page. So we're not going to spend too much time with number 5, but it is a little bit different than number 1 in the fact that it's not just a general money talk, but it's specifically about, the kind of debt that you have and how you plan on addressing it individually and as a family. So number 6 is a very interesting one to me. Number 6 is not being communicative about annoying things. That means you're not talking about some of the things that are annoying you. Now, listen, depending on where you're at in your relationship right now, depending on where you're at in your marriage, you're not going to understand this point. And what I mean by that is, if you're first in that infatuation period, in that dating period that can last anywhere from 6 to 18 months, you don't actually notice some of those annoying things, because it's hard to see red flags with rosy colored glasses. I'm going to say that one more time. It's hard to see red flags with rosy colored glasses. When you're in that infatuation period, when you're in that time where you're really in love and it's a lot of romance, you don't really notice those annoying things. You don't notice the small things that your potential spouse or your fiance is doing that will drive you up a wall later on. And if you don't start having those conversations about the little things that are different between you and them, then it's going to cause some friction in the relationship. So what do I mean by that? Some of you think it's obvious that you always use a coaster on the table, or some of you think it's obvious that you put a towel down in the bathroom so that, if water gets on it, it just soaks it right up. Some of you think it's obvious that you always wash dishes before you eat, or some other small things. Whatever the small thing is that you think is obvious because that's how you were raised, that's how you were brought up. Your spouse comes from a different background. And to them, some of that stuff is not going to be obvious, and it's going to annoy you. Something small like how they wash their clothes, something small like maybe it's snoring, but it's something that happens on a very frequent basis that is just really, really odd to you, and it's going to be annoying. And before, it wasn't an issue because you guys love each other so much. You just come back from the wedding, or you're either planning for the wedding, or you're coming back from the honeymoon, and you're just really in that infatuation phase. And so those annoying things, they just kind of blend into the background, because again, it's hard to see red flags with rosy colored glasses. But now you see them and they're annoying. What do? You got to open up that conversation. You got to open up that conversation and say, hey, babe, one thing that probably annoys me more than it should is that when you wash dishes, you go from left to right instead of right to left, or you don't use a dishwasher, you don't use a dish rag, or whatever the small thing is. And just have that conversation, because it may be that they're willing to change. If you phrase it in a way where you're not attacking them and you're just saying, hey, the way I was raised, this is how we did things. And I know that doesn't make it right, but it sure does make me happy when I see it. Is there any way you could possibly change that small thing? And if you start that conversation and it's a safe conversation, then you can avoid a lot of frustration inside of your marriage. So number 6, of the 7 mistakes that people make in the first years of their marriage, number 6 is not talking about those annoying things. And that takes us into number 7, not mastering the skill of fighting well. If you don't know how to fight well as a couple, then your relationship is in for some very tough times. And what's dangerous about this is a lot of couples, when they first get married and they're in that honeymoon phase, because they don't argue about things, they think that they can argue well. And that's simply not true. A lot of couples believe that avoiding arguments means that they argue well, and that's not true. You have to get into some heated debates in a safe way, in a controlled way, and get through them without making permanent scars based off of temporary feelings. Again, you're part of the Phenomenal family, so you know this is one of our core values. We do not make permanent decisions based off of temporary feelings, which means when we're in an argument, we're going to be temporarily mad, temporarily upset, but we're not going to make permanent decisions on saying something or doing something because we're temporarily upset or temporarily mad. I want you to think of something real quick. Think of the best house you've ever walked into. I mean, you walked in and it was immaculate. It smelled nice. It was well lit. It looked like the walls just got painted for some reason, like the whole house is just glowing. And you say to yourself, wow, this house is amazing. Now, in that moment, you don't tell yourself, I guess these people never live here, or they never walk on these carpets, or they never make trash, or they must never cook, or they must never have a bad smell in here. What you say to yourself is, these people really cleaned up really well. They took out the trash. They washed the dishes. They sprayed the Febreze with the air freshener. They tidied up a little bit, and they made their house welcoming for us. And the same way in your marriage, you shouldn't try to seek to have a clean marriage by simply not making trash. You have to have a clean marriage by learning how to take out the trash when it's made, learning how to forgive when someone has offended you, learning how to argue when you disagree with something, learning how to reset expectations when you fail to meet your spouse's expectations. These skills on fighting well, you have to learn how to use them. And it's not something that you may have from your past. Think about it. The relationships that you had in your past, if it got too bad, you either just got out of the relationship, you moved away, maybe you changed schools, maybe you changed majors, maybe you changed wherever you lived at. And so a lot of relationships that go deep, it's hard to get those skills of fighting well, but you need them, because once you get married, it's you and your spouse kind of there together forever. So you got to learn really quickly how to take care of the trash that's created inside of the relationship, how to fight fair, how to fight well, and how to reach solutions without scars. So we got to get to the bottom of whatever's, going on without the knockout, drag out, yelling, fighting, and the rest. So I think it's a safe place here to say that we do have a course on this. If you find yourself struggling to fight fair, if you find yourself struggling to have good communication, we do have a communications course, and I'll leave that link in the description of this episode. But number 7 is not mastering the skill of fighting well. So I'm going to go backwards on that list one last time before we leave. Number 7 was not mastering the skill of fighting well. Number 6 was not communicating about the annoying things. Number 5 is not being honest about debt before you get married. Number 4 is not moving out on your own as a couple. Number 3 is forgetting that the small gestures go a long way. Number 2 was not establishing equal household roles. And number 1 was not talking about money. Those are the 7 mistakes that couples make in their first year of marriage. And I'm hoping you were taking note. I hope you were thinking about, which one of these 7 things am I doing right now? Or how many of these 7 things are we currently doing right now? And what's the action step I'm going to take right after listening to this podcast that I think is going to improve our marriage? What's the immediate action step once this podcast goes off?